Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Employability Skills digital event. My name is Claire, and I'm an events manager at CMI. I'll shortly be handing over to David McLaughlin to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the event, don't forget to submit them in the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we'll answer as many questions today as we can in the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with those who book to attend. So now over to David McLaughlin, CHMC Assessment Manager at CMI, to begin the event. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire, and morning, everybody. I hope everyone's well wherever they are in the world today. I want to talk about a few things today. They've got quite a lot to get through. I want to talk about what we think the future of work is going to look like, or what I think the future of work is going to look like. And then I want to talk about the employability skills that we need to develop in order to adjust to that future of work. So when we think about the employment landscape that we're looking at the moment, we're really thinking about what's going to be different. And one of the things that's come out of this pandemic is a really different way of working for lots of people. Now, I say lots of people because not everybody can do this. It really depends on the type of work that you do and the type of interaction that you need to have with your customers and your clients as to whether or not some of the remote stuff that we'll be talking about works for you. But I think that said, there is a different way of working for everybody, however we're working, whatever job that we're doing. So we think about the people that we're working with and the roles that are changing and how we need to stay up to date with legislation in that new landscape, what that means to us in terms of what we have to provide to our teams if we're managers and team leaders, and what we can expect from the organisations that we work for. Things are changing in the way we work with we work with difficult conversations, and we work with our staff if we're working remotely, and I'm going to focus mostly on working remotely today. If we're working remotely, how are we doing with our staff? How are we supporting our teams? If we're thinking about our teams, we need to think about the way we upskill people and reskill. And for me, the difference there really is upskilling is about gaining new skills, and reskilling is about rehoning the skills that you already have, resharpening the saw, as Peter Covey says, and building ourselves so we're better placed to deal with the challenges that will come in the future. Challenges that may not have been in place for a lot of us when we first entered the employment market and when we first qualified in whatever role we're in now. And when we think about all of that, we have to remember that it's not just going to be technical. Technology plays a big part in this. And sometimes I think, if we'd have dealt with what we've dealt with over the last year, 20 years ago, before we all had Wi-Fi and we all had broadband and we all had super smart technology in our pockets and on our desks, how would it have been very different? And I think it would have been a much greater challenge. But technology isn't the answer to everything. Technology is a tool that we can use to facilitate our new ways of working. So we're going to be very much a lot of us working remotely, but we're not alone. Even though we might be sat at home alone, we might be sat in an office space alone. When offices open up, and I know some offices are starting to open up already, it will be very different because of the COVID regulations and the safety elements that we have to put in place. Perspex between desks, one person to an office, maybe moving away from shared office spaces. All of those things will make us feel slightly isolated more than we ever have before. So we need to make sure that we make connections, even if they are remote ones. We need to have people we can check in with on a regular basis. And this is where the technology comes into play, because if we think about what we're doing today, we could do this, we could have a conversation on Zoom or Teams or Meet or whatever it might be, where we're talking to people, we're seeing them, albeit not face-to-face in the same way, but we are seeing them in a way that adds more value than just email or a telephone conversation. We're seeing that body language to a certain extent, even if it's only from the waist up, and we're picking up some of those non-verbal communication skills that are missing when we don't have that visible connection to someone. Some of the challenges, of course, when we're working remotely are not seeing a crisis as an insurmountable problem, sharing that with other people, accepting that we need to reach out to people, understanding that that's okay for everybody and we all need to be able to do that. And understanding that as part of that change is going to be very different. We're going to have to work in a different way that allows us to make use of the technology, rather than walking up to somebody's desk and saying, have you got a minute? I just want to run this past you. I've got this idea, or I'm struggling with this, or I just feel like I'm not coping very well today. When you're sat at home on your own, really you need to still be able to reach out and say, can we have a chat? I just need to see someone, just need to speak to somebody and run this idea past you. Now, that comes in a challenge as well, because whilst the technology is a tool to that, the distance provides an additional problem. We want to have an open door policy, but an open door policy that is based on technology. So it may be that I want to talk to you, but I can't talk to you just now. Can we book this for 11 o'clock this morning so I can talk to you properly? So we need to think about all these things differently in the way that we're working with our teams. And we reflect that in the skills that we're looking for when we're engaging with new people, when we're engaging with new employees, with new team members, whatever it might be. So we need to think about all these things very differently. And we need to think about how we develop differently as well. And when we're thinking about remote working, again, we need to change our emphasis and we need to think about outcomes rather than inputs. We need to allow people to have those water cooler moments in their home that they would have had in the office. Now, some of you would have heard me say this before, but if you ever observe an office space at work, very often an 8-hour day will result in probably about 5 hours work if you're lucky. By the time someone gets to the office, takes their coat off, starts up their computer, goes to the kitchen, makes a cup of tea, bumps into somebody else they need to talk to, it can be 9:30 before you sit down at your desk. Then it's going through all the emails, weeding out all the rubbish, all the spam, all the circulars, all the things that you've been CC'd into that you don't really need to read. Getting through all of that, by the time that's done, you're 10 o'clock. Then you're thinking about coffee again. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing for the whole day, but we need to allow people at home to have those moments, to have that space, to not expect them to be present at their desk, their table, wherever it might be, from 9 till 5, 8 till 4, whatever their working days. We need to allow them to have that flexibility to get up, and we need to encourage that in people as well. So we need to think about this when we're encouraging people to set goals and make sure that they're setting goals appropriately and make sure we're setting goals appropriately for them, and not just filling up ours and other people's diaries with stuff to make us feel busy, because busy isn't necessarily productive or effective, as we all know. So we need to think about those things. We need to allow people space to wobble, and we need to allow people that differentiation between what we need people to do and what they think we need them to do. Now, that's a really big challenge, because when you start working at home and as we progress with this and it settles down, as more people are working remotely from the office, there is a real risk of guilt here, what we call remote worker guilt. And remote worker guilt transfers in a number of ways. And one of the ways it does it is, I work remote, you don't see me, so you don't think I'm doing anything. So I have to work from 7 in the morning till 6 at night to make up for the fact that you can't see me. Because at least now I feel busy. I'm doing stuff and I don't know what I'm doing. Some of it's not very useful, some of it doesn't matter, but I'm doing it because I've got this guilt and I feel I have to be extra productive because you're not seeing me. You're not seeing me as you walk down the corridor. You're not seeing me as you walk through the shared office space. So we need to check in with people and make sure that's okay and they're not falling into that. The other trap is, nobody's watching me. Don't need to do anything. I've got very little to do today, so I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to do a bit of gardening, a bit of shopping, have a wander. Suddenly the work piles up with these massive deadlines and people become very stressed, very under pressure. So we need to find that balance with people. And we need to find people who can work within that environment. And now that's a very different challenge. So when we're thinking about ourselves in this as well, when we're looking after our teams, we need to think about what's different for us. So if we're setting goals, who are we setting them for? Are we setting them realistically, or do we want our team to be busy? Are we got meetings in calendars for the sake of putting something in the calendar? There's nothing wrong with having a day in your calendar, but there's nothing there, because that's thinking space, that's creative space. That's enabling you to do something different, get out of that box, get out of that mindset, come back much more refreshed, much more productive than ever. Think about how you're going to collaborate with your teams. Think about your own needs. What do I need working remotely as a manager, and how am I going to get that fulfilled? Avoid looking back and thinking, this time last year we were so much more productive. 2 years ago, look what we achieved. We're not there. This is a different space. Look after yourself and build yourself a sacred space where you can keep safe. Because if you can't keep safe, you can't look after your team, and you can't look after the people that rely on you. When you're dealing with your team and when you're thinking about teams, think about how you look, think about how you appear, think about, are you bringing your whole self to a remote meeting? Or are you putting the meeting on, putting it on mute, turning your camera off and just drifting off? Because just like you would in a real space, you need to come to this from a real point of view. And always, if you have remote meetings, I would always say, follow up with a quick email. This is what we discussed. This is what we agreed. This is what we're going to achieve going forward. This is how we're going to measure it. That way you make sure everybody's listening to you. Think about how you appear. Think about what's going on in your environment and get your team to think about what's going on in their environment. Because anything behind you that's too distracting will take away from the message you're trying to get across and will get in the way of the communication that you're trying to achieve at a distance when it's not how it was before and it's very different. So think about that. Think about how you're going to look after yourself and think about how you're going to look after your team as well. Think about what makes it good for you. Think about what makes it good for them. Stay connected, stay calm, do something that keeps your stress levels down, that isn't just about work. Think about how you're going to look after your own well-being. Have a plan for when you can get back together. How is that going to work? How is that going to be different? Because remember, you're not going to be back in an office shaking hands, hugging, whatever you do when you greet people. That's going to be stopped. We can't do that anymore because of the COVID social distancing rules and regulations that we all have to abide by. And remember, it's not just about regulations and having to abide by that. A lot of people will be very, very cautious of going back to how we were physically and emotionally. A lot of people will find it very difficult to come into an office where there's people they haven't seen for a while. A lot of people will find it challenging to be in an environment where there's too many people. Is it safe? Am I safe? I've come to work. I didn't really want to come. I'm going to go home ill. What's going to happen? All sorts of anxiety going on about that. So we need to think about that as well when we bring people back into the workplace. And the real question here is, do we need to bring people back into the workplace? Can we achieve what needs to be achieved remotely? And if we can, then why are we bringing them back in the workplace? Think about what's going on, what you're getting out of the workplace that you're not getting from people working remotely. Now, all of that, we need to think about all of that. Covered most of this, I'm not going to go into that. We need to think about all of that, and we need to think about how we get that out of an applicant or how we demonstrate that when we're going for a job, when we're going for a new position. So we can think about the technology skills, we can think about the technical skills, and we can think about the accredited skills separately from what I want to talk about today. And if somebody comes to you with a qualification, they've got that qualification, you know what they can do based on that qualification. Somebody comes to you with a big list of experience, we know what they've done in the past, how is that going to reflect to today in today's working environment? So I think there are different things that we're looking for. We take away the technical skills because that's a given, that gets you through to the second part of the process. Now, what do we want to see in people and what do we need to demonstrate in ourselves in order to become more employable? So I think the first thing we need to think about is proactivity. How are we going to be proactive in the workplace? How are we going to be proactive in the application process itself? And one of the big things is to not wait to be asked. And we see something happening, we think about how we can deal with that, we think about possibilities. But we don't need to come up with all the answers, but it's no good just saying, oh, well, there's a problem there, that's your problem, that's not my problem. I don't get paid for that. That's not where we are anymore. It's about saying, okay, I've seen this problem, I don't have a solution, but has anybody else experienced this as a problem? Or is it just me? Is it a problem, or is it something that I'm not comfortable with, so I'm making it a problem for me? Here's a problem. Have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? Has anybody tried this? Because people won't have done, and that's that proactivity that will get you through the door, get you into the work environment. Now, alongside that, we need to think about accountability. What am I accountable for? I've not got slopey shoulders. I don't want to just brush this off for other people and say, that's nothing to do with me. I don't get paid for that. What am I doing? What am I accountable for? What do I need to deliver? And can I proactively deliver that? One of the things we need to think about in our teams and when people are coming through the workplace, think about how we avoid learned helplessness. So we make them accountable for what they're doing and how are they demonstrating that accountability? Do we think when someone's sat in front of us coming for a job that they are going to be accountable, or they're just going to be, it's not, I don't know how to do this. Stop there. So we need to think about that differently. We want people who are horizon scanning, and we want to be horizon scanning. What's coming up? What's the next big thing? What are our competitors doing? What are our customers wanting? All of those things are things we need to think about when we're going for a job and when we're employing other people. I like to think about how people are going to manage themselves. What are they like with timekeeping? Have they turned up to the interview on time? They turned up a little bit early. There's an old saying that 5 minutes early is too late. So we need to think about what we're expecting from people, and are we being realistic in that? How are we presenting ourselves? How are they presenting themselves? What is our personal presentation? I'm going to change my tense now and think about, as I talk through the rest of this, about going for a job rather than employing somebody, because I think that's easier. What's our personal presentation? What do we look like? Do we look the part? Do we look like somebody that belongs in this environment working for this organisation? Are we organised? Have we got ourselves there on time? Are we running in late? Have we not got the papers that we need? Have we not got the proof of identity that we need in order to show that we are employable and legally employable? Do we have our certificates with us? Do we have everything we need? What are our values? Are we mirroring our own values and ethics? And what are we saying about social justice? And is the organisation that we're going to apply for mirroring that, or are we having to hide ourselves in order to get a job with this company? Now, if you are doing that, you have to ask yourself why. Why am I doing this? Do I desperately need the money? And if you do, that's fine. That's okay. We've all done that. We've all worked for people that we haven't necessarily agreed with, but they pay well. And at that moment in time, we need the money. So there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not sustainable long term in my experience. So how are we thinking about the values of the organisation? Are we accepting of others? And are we valuing difference? And are we demonstrating that we're accepting and valuing difference? And how can we do that in an interview situation or an application situation or a psychometric testing day or whatever it might be that you're having to go through to get this job? And how are we seeing that in others? How are we going to pull it out of other people? Are we demonstrating our adaptability? There are going to be changes in roles, changes in work patterns, changes in priorities, changes in deadlines. How do we cope with that? How are we demonstrating that we can cope with that? Now, if we can't, there's not a problem with that. Not everybody can deal with change in the same way. So if you can't demonstrate that, what can you demonstrate in order to make up for that? Can you demonstrate solidness and reliability? Is that more important to you? If it is, that's fine. Demonstrate that. Don't say you can adapt to change if inside you're thinking, I just hope they don't ask me to change.
Hi, sorry about this. It seems David is experiencing a few technical issues. So if you just bear with us a moment while we try and get David back into the stream. Thank you.
Right. This is interesting. How am I going to deal with change? My computer has just died, so I've had to switch to my phone. Can somebody let me know if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, David, that's perfect. Thank you for joining again. And we'll get the slides on the screen for you in just a moment. If you just bear with me one second.
Brilliant. Well, we can share the slides afterwards. I can carry on with that.
Yes, yeah, the slides will be sent to everybody following the event. So for just one moment while we get those on the screen.
This is an example of dealing with things on the hoof, isn't it?
Exactly.
And that's a really good point, because how are you going to deal with things that come up on the hoof, in live dynamic time? How are you going to adjust what you're doing? How are you going to address a problem like that coming up? And I think this is something else that we're looking for in people that we're either going to employ, we're going to move from one team to another, or indeed, this is what you need to demonstrate when you go to a job interview. How are you going to deal with the unexpected? One of the things I used to do, and I used to interview hundreds of people when I worked in the education system. And one of the things I would do occasionally would be to say, in an interview, if you were a can of soup, what flavour would you be and why? Now, the answer wasn't really important, but what it did was it demonstrated how people dealt with the unexpected, how people dealt with surprise situations, and were they dynamic and were they able to deal with that without falling apart. And now again, there's that, If you can't deal with that kind of thing, that's not a problem, but you might not be going to the right organization if that's where you are, and that's not something that you want to do. You need to think about your organization you're going to. Think about how you're going to investigate and research the organization and decide if it's right for you. Is it the right thing for you to do? Is it the right place for you to be? And if it's not, keep looking. Other jobs are available and they may be thin on the ground, but if you go somewhere what's not right for you, that's not going to be sustainable. You're not going to be there long term. And it can be very stressful and very upsetting when that happens. And I think this is something that we all need to consider. So we've talked about adaptability, we've talked about change, we've talked about proactivity. We need to think now about how we're presenting ourselves. We talked about how we're presenting ourselves. How are we dealing with tools and technology? Are we able to use those? And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, say we can't, and we can get some training. These are the things that we can be trained on. These are the things that we can adapt to, and the things that we can deliver and develop. Have we got the slides, Claire? Because I've lost my thread. Sorry about this. How are we dealing with pressure? Are we dealing with pressure? And again, think about this, because if pressure is something that you're not able to deal with, don't put yourself in a pressurized situation. Think about what you can do in terms of how you handle the pressure. Are you good with deadlines? If you're not, that's fine. Don't go for a deadline-based job. If you're not good at sales, don't go for a sales job, because the pressure will be undealable. You won't be able to cope with the pressure, and it will throw you completely, and you'll spend more of your time trying to deal with that than dealing with the job itself. Can we move on, please, Claire? Next slide. What do you like in teamwork situations? Now, teamwork is a really interesting one, because not everybody's a team player, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're not a team player, think about how you're going to deal with teams. How are you going to engage with a team in order that the team is effective, even though you might be sitting slightly on the outside of it? And again, don't pretend you're a team player if you're not, because that will come up very quickly, and very soon you'll be found out, and that will be a challenge. And you may not be able to stay in a role where you are saying you can do things which you actually can't, you're not comfortable with. So think about that. How do you play well with others? Do you play well with others? If not, think about the job that you're going for, and does it involve a lot of teamwork, lots of collaboration? Now, you can do that without being in a team, as I say, but it becomes more of a challenge. If we could have the next slide, please. This is a really interesting one these days. And when we think about negotiation skills, we're not just thinking about how are we negotiating a sale, how are we negotiating a deal, or how are we negotiating a pay rise. We need to think about how we negotiate a solution, a potential solution to a problem that we may have come up with. How are we negotiating arriving at a deadline? If we're in a situation where we're working for a number of people, a number of managers, and this often happens, and all of them have a priority, all of them have a deadline that needs to be met and needs to be achieved. And if we're in that situation, how do we negotiate with all of them how we're going to meet those demands? And clearly we can't, so somebody has to give. And that's where your negotiation skills come in play. How are you sharing your opinions in a way that it doesn't mean you're battering somebody with your opinion? Are you flexible? Because negotiation is about flexibility as well. And how are you demonstrating that you're flexible? You listen to others, as I mentioned at the start. You listen to others, you value others' opinions, but you get your opinions across in a way that is reasonable, is adaptable, is flexible, and other people will pick those up and run with those. So we think about how we're going to negotiate, how we're going to get through those deals and those discussions in a professional way. And that's what we're looking for in other people as well. If I could have the next slide, please. We talked about technical skills. If you have technical skills, make sure that you can prove it. Now, this is not just about doing tests on the day, obviously. This is about turning up with certificates, with accreditation. Now, one thing I will say is if you turn up with certificates and accreditation, there is always that so what question for me. You have the accreditation, you have the degree, you have the qualification, whatever it might be, but so what? So what have you done with that? What have you made a difference with it? Where have you used that? Or is it just something you've done in the past, you've got the skills and you're no longer able to use them? If I give you an example of that from my own history, my first degree is in IT. Now, I graduated my first degree so long ago that it's like asking a mechanic to work on a World War I airplane. It wouldn't work for me. I haven't used those skills in such a long time that I no longer promote those as something that I've got that's up to date. I will mention that I've got a degree in IT, but I won't say this is my IT is my field and this is where I work, because it's all moved on as I've taken other routes in life and other routes in work. So if you've got those skills, mention them, but don't overplay them, because if you overplay them, then a skill becomes, as a strength, it can become a weakness. So we need to think about this. And when you're employing other people, just because they turn up with certificates, check into it. What have you done with it? Where have you made a difference? How did you use it? What difference did that make? All of those things. Think about those things. So I could have the next slide, please. Think about your physical presence, and how do you demonstrate your physical presence matches that of the organisation that you're going for. Now, if you're going for a job as a mechanic, we talked about mechanics a moment ago, if you're going for a job as a mechanic and you turn up in a three-piece suit, that may not be appropriate. That may give the people that are who are interviewing you the wrong impression completely. And likewise, if you're going for a job in a bank or an insurance company or whatever it might be, where the environment is about wearing business, what we would call business professional clothes, if you turn up in jeans and a t-shirt, you've already put yourself at a disadvantage. Is there a disconnect between your values, the way you like to present yourself, with the organisation that you're going for? Now, again, if you have those different values, I would ask myself, is this the right place for me? Should I be going to this place in the first place? And again, as I said earlier, if you desperately need the money, sometimes we have to have a workaround, don't we? Sometimes we have to say, I need this for 6 months, and for this 6 months, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And that's fine as well. But just have that in the back of your mind while you're doing what you're doing, when you're doing it. So if I could have the next slide, please. When we talked about physical presence, and something I just wanted to say actually about physical presence was, when you're on interview, if you're going to an interview, you're on interview from the moment you leave your house to the moment you return to the house. If you're interviewing people for a job, they're on interview from the moment they get on your premises. Think that way and you'll get the best out of people. Now, I used to have interviews in a massive building here in Norfolk, in the county council headquarters. And we used to get people to park outside of a window where we could see them get out of their car. And part of that interview process would be, what do they look like when they're getting out of their car? Are they demonstrating what we would expect? I would talk to the receptionist, I would talk to the security guard, I would talk to anybody that person came into contact with in order to get a much fuller picture. Because what you see when they're sat in your office is not necessarily what you're seeing as a whole picture. So that's always a useful thing to think about. These days as well, we have to think about digital presence. What does our digital presence say about us? And what are we looking at when we're looking at potentially employing people in terms of their digital presence? Is what we're seeing on their application form, or what we're seeing in our office while we're interviewing, reflective of what they do in the rest of the day? Now, you might say we have no control over what goes on in the rest of somebody else's day when they're not working, and that's absolutely true. That's very, very fair, and we shouldn't be interfering with that. But it's a good example if we say somebody sends us an application, they say, I'm very sober, I work hard, I do all these things, and then we look at their Facebook, or we look at their Instagram, and it's full of pictures that don't reflect the sort of person that we would want to employ. We're seeing that a lot more now. HR departments, interviewers will go straight to social media before they go very much further with someone's application. Think about your LinkedIn profile. Think about your professional digital presence as well as how you look physically. Think about your email. Does your email reflect where you want to be now? Or are you still using an email from when, smiling cats #1 was a fun email to have, and you weren't thinking about how that's going to appear on an application for a job, for example? So you need to look at all of this as well as looking at your physical presence. Now, all that said, if you walk around in jeans and t-shirt and that's your de facto uniform, shall we say, if your email is smileycats1@hotmail.com and you're happy with that, that's fine. I'm not suggesting you change that. I'm just suggesting you consider, is that reflecting what you want to reflect now? is that reflecting what you expect the organisation is looking for? And if it isn't, have a think about whether that's still appropriate for you where you are at this point in time. Can I have the next slide, please? The next two slides are very much about Management Direct, and we have some great facilities on Management Direct now that can look at your CV, can review your CV, can help you with your CV, ready so that you're employable ready as best you can be. They will look at your CV and say, you know, these words don't really flow. This doesn't really look good. If I look at the first paragraph, I'm not going to look at any more because, frankly, it's boring and it's not grabbing my attention. Or this is a brilliant CV. There's very little we could tell you to do with this. This is more likely to get you through that first phase of the application process, to get you to interview, to get you to that ticket to the dance, if you like. And we also have an interview skills. If I could have the next slide, please. We also have a great resource for interviews and practicing for interviews. What's it like to be an interview if you've never done one, or if you haven't done one for a long time and you've been sadly an economic victim of the pandemic, and you find yourself 15, 20 years in a role, and then suddenly you've no longer got that role and you're having to start again from scratch. They're really good resources for you to access and use. If you are a member, if you're not a member, I would strongly consider joining, and then we have different levels of membership that we can help you with as well. If I could have the next slide, please. We also have a really great resource in the Career Development Centre, and there's loads of resources in there. And I would strongly recommend, if you are in the marketplace for a new job, have a look at this, look at what's on offer, look at how we can help you to get the best opportunity when you do go for that job. If I could have the next slide, please. I think the next slide is the final slide. So some final thoughts for you. Do your research. Is the organisation that you're applying for an organisation that you want to be part of? Would you be proud to say, I work for X? Or if it's not, if it's questionable, but you need the money, think about that as a short-term plan. And if it's a short-term plan, how are you going to progress from there to somewhere that's more suitable for you, somewhere where you feel more at home, and you can say with pride, I work for this organisation. Be prepared, and be prepared for anything. You know, I mentioned the soup question. We've had the technology issues today. I started on my desktop. I'm finishing this off on my phone. So, you know, I'm living that one, aren't I? Be prepared for anything that might happen, anything that somebody might throw at you. Practice for your interview. Once you get to interview, practice. Don't overthink it. Don't over practice, because you need it to be dynamic and live still in front of the people that are interviewing you. But do have a practice with a friend, you know, somebody you trust, who will give you honest feedback, not somebody who just says, oh, that's lovely, yeah, you look lovely, you know, that's smashing, I'd give you a job. Why would you? You know, what is it about what I've done that would get me the job? So get somebody to practice with that will be honest, give you honest feedback. Make sure you look the part, whatever that means for the organisation you're going to. Make sure you look the part. And be as confident as you possibly can. Now, confidence is not something that we can all summon up. And especially when it's a big change. If you've been in a role for 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is, and you're comfortable in that role, and you suddenly find yourself unemployed and looking for a new job, summoning up confidence is going to be a challenge. So think about ways that you can be more confident. Start to live the job that you want. Start to demonstrate that role, even if you're not in that job. Think what that would be like for you. Try and visualize it, and it will give you as much confidence as possible. And finally, if you are in the position where you're going for a job, if you are in a position where you're looking for work, you know, you can do this. You've got to where you are in life so far with your own resilience and your own perseverance. Whatever challenges you've been through, where you are now, this is just another challenge on your journey, and you've got this, and you can do this. And if you do all the things right, you do your research, you do your practice, you do your preparation, you give yourself a much better chance, and you'll be a huge success. That's all from me in terms of input. I'm going to hand back to Claire, because I think we've got some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. And yeah, thank you all for bearing with us while we sorted out the technical issue, while we got David back into the stream. Lots of interaction, which is really great to see in the chat there. Lots of positive comments and lots of practical tips and advice there from David. So if you do have any questions, you still do have time to submit them. We've had a few pre-submitted questions from people that booked to attend. So the first question from Ethan, David, what can you do with gaps in employment?
That's a really good question. It's one that comes up quite often, actually, so I'm glad it's come up today, and thank you, Ethan. Gaps in employment are fine. Everybody has gaps in employment. But the thing about gaps is you need to be honest. Don't let anybody fill in the gaps themselves. So what do I mean by that? Well, I've interviewed people who have gaps in their employment because they've been looking after children. They've had caring responsibilities and haven't had to work. And sometimes they felt that wasn't appropriate to say. They felt that would give them a disadvantage. I say, no, don't do that, because the other thing that you find is, and I've interviewed people that have gaps in their employment history because they've been in prison, because they've been incarcerated, because they've not been able to work for whatever reason at all. Now, the thing is, we can deal with all those things if we're honest about it. So if you have gaps in your employment, what were you doing? If you were unemployed, I would put on my CV that I was job searching. And if I go back far enough on my CV, I've got that on my CV. Job searching. You may be volunteering. You may have a caring responsibility. You may be incarcerated. And if you were incarcerated, you're not going to be able to hide that for very long. So don't hide it on your CV. Be honest about what's happened in your life, where you are, and don't let other people make up their own mind about why you've got a gap in your work history. Own it.
Yeah, be honest, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So another question has come from Aidan. How would you make yourself more employable if you're currently unemployed?
I think this is a really interesting one as well. And this is a big challenge for a lot of people. But I think what I would tend to do is to try to live the role. Now, that sounds really strange, but if you're going for a job in a particular organization, what does somebody in that organization do? What does somebody in the job that you want do? What does that involve? And start trying to live that. Because if you turn up for an interview and you already look the part, you're acting the part, you're saying the right things, you're much more likely to get a foot in the door, much more likely to get the next step of the process. Now, the other thing you can do about making yourself more employable is to consider things like volunteering for a week. Now, I don't mean with another organisation, so the RSPB or whatever it might be that you support, but if you go for a job and you say, look, I know you're concerned about this. I know I've got areas in my employment that I don't necessarily have the skills that you want, but I believe I can do this. I'll actually come and do this for a couple of days so we can try each other out, see if it works for you, see if it works for me. And if it does, at the end of that couple of days, we'll go forward and you'll employ me. However, if at the end of that couple of days you don't like me, I don't like you, we'll part ways and we'll just chalk it up as experience. And it's something that I can take to my next interview and to my next application. So what does someone look like in that role, and how do I portray that in myself?
Definitely. Really good answer. A question from Morag Hutchinson, who was on the stream, says, eye contact is important to really see the interviewee and interviewer. Do you have any tips for that aspect of remote interviews? That's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Morag, and eye contact is important. As long as it doesn't become a staring competition, because that can quickly go from interesting to really, really uncomfortable in a very short space of time. I think the thing I would do is to make sure that you bring your whole self to the interview in either role, either you are the applicant or the interviewee, and pay full attention to the person. Look them in the eye on the screen. Make sure that you are, in essence, in the room with them, looking them in the eye, paying them attention, listening to what they have to say, actively listening. Demonstrate that you're actively listening at the same time. But that's a very good question there, Warwick. It is a challenge. It's not as easy as in the room because of all the non-verbals that we don't pick up on. But as far as you can, be there with them technically, if you can't be there with them physically.
Absolutely. And you have touched on this question, but Richard on the stream is asking, what is the view of what you wear for an interview remotely versus face to face? For example, professional attire versus business casual?
I would check that out before you, what are they expecting before you actually have the interview? I would always go with what you've done in terms of research. It's all happening here today. What you've done in terms of research, but whether it's remote or whether it's physically there, actually, you still need to dress the same. They will see what you're wearing from the waist up if you're sat down at a desk. So what you've got on that they can't see, you can have your pajama trousers on if you want, or your shorts or whatever. But if it requires wearing a shirt and tie and a jacket, then wear a shirt and tie and a jacket. And also think about what's going on behind you. An example of this is, have you got washing behind you? Are people walking around in the room? Have you got things on the wall that you wouldn't necessarily want to be seen in an interview? Is the background distracting? And I'm going to demonstrate here. At the moment, we have these CMI banners, which are great. But my office space is actually a music room. So if I do this, you can start to see the instruments behind me. Now, if you've got things like that behind you, is it going to distract? Are people going to be looking at you, or are they going to be looking at what's on the wall behind you? Are they going to be looking at your interesting collection of books, or your interesting collection of pictures, or things that you have hanging on the wall and in the room? So think about that as well. It's not just about how you dress. It's much more than that. If it's remote, it's what's going on in your environment at the same time. Is the postman going to ring your doorbell halfway through? And if they are, if you're expecting a delivery, I wasn't, but if you're expecting a delivery, say, I'm expecting a delivery. If it comes, it's going to interfere with this. I hope you can appreciate that. We're not expecting people to work at home in sealed environments and have all the things that they would have in the office with them. So we need to give them some space, but we need to think about what's going on behind you.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really helpful. A question from Dal on the stream. So please, can you explain more about what you mean by the live role? Live the role. What you mean by live the role?
Yeah, I will. I'll try to, because this is quite a difficult idea, really. But say you're going for a role as a let's say a teacher. In my own experience, is going for a role as a teacher. How does a teacher behave? Teachers, if they're asked questions, if you're an educator and you're asked questions, you try to give an answer. You put yourself in that place and you act like a teacher would act. If you're a mechanic and you want to go for a role as a mechanic, how does a mechanic act? How would you expect an interaction with a mechanic to be? So think about putting yourself in that other person's shoes, some empathy, if you like, and think about, how would I expect a shop worker to react to me? How would I expect a lawyer or whatever it is that you're going for to react to me personally? If I went into their environment, what would I expect? How would I want to be treated? How would I expect them to deal with a problem? If it's something they can't answer, what would I expect them to do? Would I expect them to just go, I don't know? You'd have to ask that person over there. Or would I expect them to say, well, I can't answer that, but if you'd like to hold on a minute, I'll go and find somebody who can answer that? Or would you expect them to go a bit further and say, if I take your email address, I don't think we can answer that today, but I'll run that past my tech department and they will email you at the end of the week. Is that going to be okay for you? So we're managing people's expectations. We're living that role. We're doing what we would want to see in somebody doing that role, even though we're not in that role yet. So we're demonstrating what we believe that person would do in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got time for one, maybe two more questions. Question from Alfonso Julio on the stream. How to demonstrate that at over 50, you still have the energy and desire to work well?
I think the first question for that is, do you? Do I have that energy and desire, or am I just counting down? Am I just happy to do what I'm doing? Am I just happy to take an easy job, to take the money, to see me through till I get my pension? Be honest. Again, be honest about it. If you don't have the drive and you don't have the energy, look for something else, because your values will have changed, your needs will have changed, the things that make you happy, the things that you need to achieve, the things that you need to get to pay the bills may necessarily have changed. So think about, do I have the drive? And if you have the drive, demonstrate it, live the role, like I was saying before. But it's a really good question. Do I have the drive? Can I be bothered? Do I just want an easy life? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that at all. If you want an easy life, go for an easy life. There are consequences, obviously, because you may not earn as much money as you want to. You may not have the career you want to. You may not have the authority over people that you had before. But is that important? What's important to you? You know, nobody gets to the end of their life and says, oh, I wish I'd worked more, wish I'd done more hours, wish I'd worked harder. You know, what's important to you in what's left of your working career? You're never going to believe this. There's now a skip being delivered next door. That's going to get noisy as well. It's just a mad challenge this morning.
David.
What a way to start the week.
Brilliant.
If you're all still there with us, thank you for hanging on. This has been a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'll just take this the last question now then from our fan. How can employers help educational institutions, especially the further education sector, in addressing and developing or bridging the skills gap shortage?
I really love this question. Thank you for this question, because I've worked in both sides of this, and I've been in education this most of my career. What education establishments need is for employers to say, this is what I want, this is what we need. We've done a horizon scanning, this is what's coming up. We need people to be able to reach these challenges. We need proactive people, people that will adaptable to change. We need you to teach these skills to people so that we don't have to. Because if you send us people with degrees, but with all the other skills that we need, we're going to grab them with both hands. If you send me somebody with a degree that has none of the life skills, isn't proactive, isn't adaptable to change, doesn't know how to negotiate, the degree isn't the be all and end all. There's 20 people with those coming through the door. I want somebody who's the full package. And this is where industry has a part to play in this as well, because they really need to be talking to trainers, to educational establishments and saying, this is what we need. You know, don't keep training for people for jobs that no longer exist. And we have a habit of doing that in the West. You know, we train people for jobs that no longer exist, or we train people for jobs that we don't even know what they are yet, but we're teaching the old skills because they're lucky to have education, because that's what we've done all the time. And we need to think about this very, very differently. And I see there's a sweet spot where industry and education get together, help each other. This is what we need. This is what we don't need. This is what we want in people, but have those open and frank conversations.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, David. Well, I think that's it for today's session. So thank you to everybody who joined us, and thank you to David for your insights and expertise. If you're a member of CMI, don't forget to log into Management Direct using the link in the private chat, where you can find a whole range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. If you're not yet a member, you can join our community via the link in the chat as well, where you can also access Management Direct portal and sign up to the CMI newsletter. So thanks again to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your patience with us.